Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight to in this very cold, miserable weather. The Friargate Community Archaeology Project was established, it says 2013, it ran in 2013, but we had our first session in 2012 in this room. Later on, I've got a picture of that, but we ran basically for the spring and summer of 2013 weekly sessions, and that project was integrated with the planning process because the meeting house here had got to the point where it was felt that things had to change to make the building more economical and better for visitors, and to provide more rooms so that the building would become more useful and better occupied. And so I was asked to coordinate some community work here. The York Archaeological Trust undertook some work for where it was judged that it was inappropriate for community groups to dig. So there were some places where there's some deep holes dug to assess ground conditions, and those were done by Kurt, who is here this evening, Kurt Hunterman, who I'm sure is well known to most of you. So it's lovely to have you here, Kurt. And there are other members of the team who are here. Jenny Geddes, I think, was here somewhere. Where is Jenny? There's Jenny. She was one of the members of that project. So we're here, and as you know, this is a I did do the space bar, that one. It doesn't seem to work. I'll find the arrows. Where's your arrows? There's your arrows. That's better. So it's a very small enterprise. Is there a point thing, or what you can see is, can you see on the left-hand side of the drawing, there's an arrow with a little corridor going out. That is the alleyway that runs from the garden here out onto Clifford Street. And what was proposed was basically a new octagonal tower, which you can just see outside, and a new lift and stairwell to improve access, and various work to the rooms downstairs towards the Woolman room, which is in the basement. So it was a very small enterprise that was proposed, but what had to happen was that there was a garden wall that ran from the octagonal building across to the bottom wall there. That wall had to be completely demolished. And so it was felt that the community volunteers, that was something the community volunteers could undertake. We could scratch around in the surface and be part of the development project. And so we got together with the U3A and members of this meeting to do that project. And as John has pointed out, we're in a very significant place, because Clifford's Tower, York Castle, is here, and indeed the northern boundary wall of the castle actually runs through the basement of this building. It's in the bottom, it's visible in the Woolman room. I did in a wild moment of enthusiasm even contemplate leading you all down there tonight if it's free. But I thought that would be logistically quite difficult, but it's worthwhile having a look at that. Can you put your hands up if you've seen this wall? So several people have seen it, so that's good. And part of what the new works was in the meeting house was to make sure this wall was better. The problem with having a substantial medieval wall in a room that's used for meetings is that these walls have got no damping. So it was a constant constant source of damp and mold and horrible smells coming into that basement room. So what the architects decided to do was to enclose it in glass doors, ventilate it, so that it be, and light it so it would be visible, and people could see that. So that is the wall. And those of you who are familiar with the Royal Commission's volumes on York, there's they talk about this wall being the northern boundary of York Castle, and it was also the northern boundary of the Franciscan Friary, because a great dollop of the medieval castle of York was given to the Franciscans, as is illustrated here. I hope it's not a particularly good shot, but you can just see, just to the left of the castle, the Bridgestone Tate's illustration of the Franciscan Friary, which was a massive building just in here. And we are just at the end of that. You can just see Castlegate, St Mary's Castlegate Church running off there. So we're in a really important historic site. And when we started off this work, we did not have the benefit of the York Historic Towns Atlas that was still being worked on. And that's such a fantastic resource for anybody trying to understand the development of the city of York. But what we also were aware of was that the Roman road that ran at the south of the Roman fortress, along what is roughly Coney Street to this day today, continued along to the along the line of Castlegate towards the castle. And in Roman times, there was there a Roman cemetery. So what we have is a multi-period site with all sorts of occupation on it, and possibilities of who knows what when you start to dibble around. So we were all quite excited. No idea what we were going to find. Now, what you can see here is a map from the Historic Towns Atlas showing the Quaker Meeting House as it was in 1852. And those of you who are familiar with this building will know that there was a very large meeting house. This room we're in now, it was known as the small meeting room, and the big foyer area was a huge meeting house, which had a very large gallery, which was supported on cast iron columns. Those now that meeting house, which is represented by the bigger of those two squares, Friargate running down the road there, the bigger building was the main meeting house. Now that had to be demolished because in the 60s and 70s it became clear that although it's an important Georgian building, it was in a very perilous state. The roof was not substantially attached to the walls, and the walls were being pushed out. And eventually it got to the point where the insurance company said, we're not going to insure this building for public use any longer. You've got to do something. And like many religious groups, the Quakers were in two minds about this. There were progressive modernizers who said, rip it down and we'll redevelop the site, which is indeed what eventually happened. But there were a small group of weighty Quakers here, many of whom were people who'd gone to the Quaker schools at Bootham or the Mount and had grown up with this building and loved it and were very, very, very warmly attached to it. The last thing they wanted to do was to have that old meeting house destroyed. But eventually, what the people running the meeting said to these people who wanted the building, okay, go and see what you can find. Do what you can. Go and talk to people. See if you can find it. We've looked at this. We've consulted with engineers. We've come to the conclusion that the only way forward is to rip it down and to build new rooms on the space. So a small committee of Quakers was sent forth into the community, and they went out and consulted with the Georgian Society, the Victorian Society, and all sorts of people, and invited them in and said, can you see a way of saving this building? Because it was a magnificent structure. This went on for some months, and eventually everybody came to the conclusion that there really was no way forward for this building to be saved, and it would have to be demolished. And that was fed back, and so that's what happened. And then of course what happened was the Quaker community had to apply to the council for permission to destroy a Georgian building, fine Georgian building, much cherished, much loved, well documented, in the heart of the city of York. Well, can you imagine what would happen today if you wanted to do that? There would be a huge outcry, but there was none, because everybody had been consulted who would have an opinion, and there were no objections to the taking down of that building. So that building got demolished. There are traces of it around. The architect was a man called Bailey, and as you come in, you'll see that there's some cast iron posts that support the portico outside. Those were some of the original cast iron posts that supported the gallery in this building. And you've got to remember that the Quaker meeting here could accommodate over 1,000 people at a full. So that's obviously a lot of those would be school children, but it was a big thing. So that got lost. That was lost. And then the new buildings, the new rooms that you can see out off the foyer out there, were built in their place, and we've got to where we are. So that was the phase of work that was going on in the 1980s. Oh, sorry, yes, this is slightly out of order, but this is the ancient wall, for those of you who haven't seen it, the ancient wall, which is downstairs in the basement in the Woolman room. And what you can see, that's a slightly barrel vaulted room, and that we think the room here, which is underground now, that supported part of the old meeting house running out there. And this is Victorian industrial building that was probably put in the 19th century with very substantial footings. Now, the last thing that had to be done once the building works were finished here in the 80s was new steps had to be cut from the patio outside to go down into the garden by the U3A entrance area. And in the process of doing that, the buildings right at the end of the project, the new buildings were up, and right at the end of the project, they were just doing this work, and the builders, guess what they found? Human skeletons. And this is despite the best efforts of a group called the York Excavation Group. Does anybody remember the York Excavation Group? YAYAS? Very good. Well, YAYAS had been here doodling around, seeing what there was. They found nothing in their investigations when the site was being redeveloped. But the builders found these human remains, and nobody wanted to hold anything up with archaeological investigations. So I think this was not, this was possibly politely hushed up. And what happened was people decided, the builders and the Quakers here decided to gather these bones together and make the builders created a small plywood coffin and put the bones in and bury them in the garden in the, outside what was the U3A office area outside. Now, so that was happily done, and then a small plaque, wooden board notice board was put up saying that these bones had been found, and that stood in the courtyard outside the U3A offices downstairs for many years, and it's still downstairs in the basement here, saying that there were human remains. So we knew when we started our project, we knew that there were human remains on the site that needed to be excavated, because that was exactly where the new lift shaft building was going to go. So that was one of the reasons why we had to do some digging. It wasn't just so we had to do digging and some demolition. So this was basically a summary of where we are. We had to record a demolished garden wall, investigate wall foundations, and recover human bones. So that was the aims of the project, working with professionals in the YAT. Now, we managed to do all these things. We produced some little newsletters. These were all coordinated as part of a fundraising campaign, because it's very expensive to do this sort of work. And so we produced newsletters to let people know what we were doing, to hope to get people involved. We had to do some demolish cut down one tree, and then investigate this this wall. Now the wall, can you see this wall here? It's not a particularly brilliant slide. When you see a chap standing by, and you can see a lot of this wall is made out of large limestone blocks with a couple of very substantial stones at the top. It was then topped with bricks. And when we started off our project, this was just a garden wall that had to go. So we began to knock it down brick by brick, taking it apart and trying to make sense of it. Our subsequent researches have shown that this is, in fact, one of the original garden walls associated with Castlegate House, which is the large Masonic lodge on Castlegate, which was built in the mid-18th century, 1850s, and had gardens that ran all the way down from Castlegate right down to the river. The land holdings here are quite complicated, but there have been times in the past when the Quakers bought up bits of the land, and that included parts of what had once been parts of the garden of Castlegate House. So we had to demolish this this wall. One of the people who was part of the project was a watercolor artist, and she came and did a whole series of watercolor paintings of the project in progress, going from the destruction of the walls, various activities going on, and eventually the building, and produced a fundraising calendar. And we got our members of the U3A group were happily involved cleaning the bricks, which we eventually sold for another additional contribution to the fundraising of the fundraising activities to sponsor some of the work. So that's some of the work that we were doing. We also tried to do a bit of public archaeology. We put on activities for kids in the summer holidays in August, and on the 26th of August we had a public open day where one of the members here dressed up as a monk and rang a bell on Clifford Street and encouraged people to come in to see the final phase of excavation. And we timed this in such a way that this was actually the last day of our digging, and it was the day that we managed to excavate the pit, which the coffin of human bones was excavated. So we dug that up on the 26th of August in front of the public, and the teas and stuff was all available for people here. So it was a fun activity. And then began the post-excavation phase of the work. Now, most of the ashlar blocks were thought, we thought the most likely case was that these were probably parts of the medieval structure of the friary that had been reused in the 18th century and reconstituted into the wall of the garden wall for Castlegate House. So there are a lot of these limestone blocks, and many of those are still in the garden to this day, being used by the gardeners for edging. But there were two very substantial stones, the big ones on the top, and nobody really knew much about them. We couldn't understand what they were, and it is some of our members had fancy ideas about what these stones were. Some people thought they were deliberately placed in the wall because they were unusual looking objects. One looked a bit like a bear. You could just about see it as a bear. But what we did, we managed to engage Leslie Collins from the YAT, who came along and cleaned these up properly and did drawings of them. And then we got Stuart Harrison, who is, I think, still the archaeologist for York Minster, to come and have a look at them. And he was very quickly clear that these were part of a Carnarvon arch, which is a particular style of medieval doorway that was introduced in Carnarvon Castle in about 1230, 1250, somewhere around there, and became a standard in later medieval architecture. And that fitted, the date for that fitted perfectly with the date of the foundation of the Franciscan Friary. So we are now pretty convinced that we have got some substantial stonework from the Franciscan Friary. Because there's obviously there's the Friar's Wharf wall that still survives, but this is some extra archaeological detail that we are pleased to have recovered. Then we had the human bones, and this was a bit of a mess. And none of us were experts in the identification of human bones. I'd started off my career in archaeology. I was a zoology graduate, and I'd been asked to go and help measure human bones on a site in Bedford when I was quite a young man. And I spent 2 weeks measuring the long bones in Bedford. I found it quite a dull activity, to be honest, and determined that my human bones was not going to be where I was going to spend the rest of my career. So I've not got any significant expertise in this area. But we fortunately recruited from the University of York a couple of master's students who were studying human burials and human anatomy, and they came along and did an initial survey of the bones and identified that we had 3 or 4 people in this assemblage of bones, and there was a single humerus that we found in our little dibblings elsewhere on the site. So we laid these out and looked at them, these young people produced a report which was a provisional report for us, and then we had another osteoarchaeologist have a look at them, and he agreed largely with their results. And so we were quite pleased with this, but we didn't have enough evidence, didn't have proper photographs and illustrations to submit this as a final report. So we then managed to advertise locally and got a volunteer called Dr. Rose Drew. Has anybody heard of Dr. Rose Drew? She's an American person who lives in York, but she'd done a PhD at the university on human remains and has quite a lot of experience on this. She now also runs a small publishing house, and she came along and in the last year or so looking at our bones, And she made some interesting observations on some of the bones, in that while most of them are perfectly normal Caucasian European bones, she spotted that a few of the bones came with distinctive Negroid characters. She knew, I don't know how they do this, these people, especially when you've got fragments of a skull. But because she had experience of American material, I think she was able to recognize this. So she said, I think some of these bones are not European, because we didn't know what date these bones are. Whether could they be Roman, could they be medieval, could they be later? So that's got our minds thinking. And we decided after a short while to see if we could get some C14 dates done on this material. And there's a scheme run by the Council for British Archaeology where you can submit, voluntary organisations can submit as specimens for dating. And we did this, and the date came back, and this came back just this summer, about 2 days before I bumped into John. No, it wasn't John, it was Ian Tempest. So I was walking past Ian, we'd had on Parliament Street, and I was just having a chat, and he said, would you like to do a tour? And I was full of enthusiasm, because the date that came back for us for this date was that these were mid-17th century burials. So this was really quite stimulating and quite exciting. So what this is beginning to look like, these could be early Quaker burials. And we have subsequently managed to track down the burial records for the early meeting house here. And we've established that there was a Quaker meeting house on this site from 1674. All these records are now kept in the Brotherton Library in York, and that there was a short period that there were interments on this piece of land. The site was owned by a family called the Nightingales, and they used it for the burial of their family and a few other Quakers, including, there is a reference to the burial of a person called John Ye Planter from Maryland. And we wonder whether it is possible that the Negroid skeleton that we've got could be the physical remains of John Ye Planter. So we're now hoping to generate income and interest to get some ancient DNA research done to see if anybody can track down more about these burials. So that's an interesting thing. So we're now almost 100% convinced that the bones that were buried were actually early Quaker burials. Now, what's also happened in the post-excavation research is that we have been consulting other excavations in the area. And many of you may remember that in about 1983-84, Patrick Ottaway carried out major excavations underneath the big hotel that's just behind here, known as the Castle Garage Dig. And he found a big ditch that was running around. But there are also human skeletons there. And those were interpreted as most likely to be from the Franciscan friary. But we are now of the opinion that actually they could well be part of this burial ground, because we've uncovered this map, which shows, this is a 17th century map, and it shows the castle, it shows Friargate, it shows Tower Street running round. And if you see the little yellow blob there, we think that is a representation, one of the first representations of the first Quaker meeting house here that was built on this site. And you can see the gardens behind it run down towards Tower Street, and that's exactly where the other burials have come from. So we think what we found is the first Quaker burial ground on the site, and also some substantial bits of masonry from the Franciscan Friary. So for a small little community project, it has taken a long time. We're still working on some of the finds. We think that we've got some significant historical details to add to our understanding of the city of York. So that's all I wanted to say this evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and say that I'll be very happy to do my best to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll check the questions on Zoom in a moment. Most of them are, why can't you make the screen bigger? It's on, but yes, I'm not very IT literate, I'm afraid. Are there any questions? Sure, there must be.
I've got
David?
No.
I visited a couple of houses on Castlegate that slowly by the Masonic house. It's just 2 or 3 doors down. There's a related to their back garden, and it seems that also had a lot of church style, I call it church style remains of brickwork and stone in the back garden. So would that be part of the friary?
Well, it's hard to say. What I do remember from Patrick Ottaway's excavation was that Castlegate House had a big lawn, because Castlegate House looked over the river. So it was a place that was deliberately made visible from the river, and there was a big flat lawn that was laid there, and this lawn was made by digging huge, well, quite narrow trenches that were only about that wide and about 4 foot deep, and they were filled with plaster and rubble in order to provide excellent drainage for grass, because they knew that the soils here are so wet and damp and clay. If you wanted a lawn, had to have decent drainage. So there were major build-ups of soil and importing all sorts of things to increase the ground level and drainage and improve drainage. So it's quite possible there was masonry from that building. If you have time to look around the garden, then it's likely to see many of these stones since they.
I did find one in the newspapers for 1889. I was searching, it's just a general search on the York newspaper archives. And there is a report in 1889 during the construction of the combined court, police station and fire station across the road.
Okay.
A burial was found.
Okay, down there.
And they summoned James Rain, who said that it isn't ancient, but that could be anything. And they were simply recovered and the building completed.
Oh, really?
So all we have is a little report of the discovery.
Well, that's more likely to be Friary,
Friary
burials down there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
The other side of what is now Clifford Street. Friargate. And they found this one burial. And there is one photo in the Evelyn collection of the site taken from over here, showing the empty site of what's going to be the magistrate's court. And you can just see there's obviously a pit being dug just roughly where the police station was, just there. Tantalised me think that could be it. But it's still one of these things keep turning up.
They do, yeah.
Right.
Very good.
Not a question, but a comment. I mean, the basement of Castlegate House is massive.
Yeah.
So when that was constructed, a lot of material would have come out.
Yeah.
And presumably just went into the garden.
Yeah, that's right.
So that could easily be remains of the Franciscan Friary.
Container. Yeah.
And of course, it's a very complex site, as Andrew said. Henry III gave it to the Franciscans in the 1280s as a sort of thank you. and they were allowed to use the embankment of what was the Northern Bailey Wall to preach, start with, before they started constructing this great Franciscan friary. And it's a very important site, this one. I mean, Edward II stayed here in 1312, and his son was born 9 months later. So it's like to say that, you know, it's on the castle grounds. And we get so used to what we see today, but it's hard to imagine that, of course, the early Norman castle from 1068 to about 1250 was like Windsor. They keep in the middle and 2 bailies, a northern bailey and a southern bailey, because they did, as Andrew said, they found this enormous ditch in 1984. I think it was about 25 metres across. Huge. You know, that's not an arbitrary earthwork. That's something very substantial. So again, this keyhole surgery goes on.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Nick?
When you dismantled the wall, did you do a mortar analysis?
Now that's very interesting. We've got plenty of samples of mortar that we saved. We haven't done mortar analysis, but I think I've heard recently that there is a new technique for mortar analysis. We're using, is it isotopes within? Yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit more about this? I only recently discovered it.
If I could, all I can tell you is from some recent ones that I've had done by people like Womersley's, they've moved into doing more of the isotopes to look at the makeup of what is in there. Because obviously stuff at that age you might find bits of shell you'd expect to find where actually the cement came from. And of course everything's carbon based, so you have a good chance, but it all gets a bit too scientific for me. So I tend to be very practical, but I have heard of this, and I think again what I've picked up is it does help to date it as well.
Yeah.
Which is the important thing to say.
Yeah.
It might be a mortar from.
Well, we're pretty certain that this is 18th century mortar. It's been repatched. That's the trouble. These walls are often rebuilt. There were bits added on when the 19th century foundations were put in and so forth. So that's complicated. But yeah, but I've only recently discovered this new isotopic approach to mortar. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, again, just an observation, but Castlegate was such an important street. In a world before Plymouth Street, not even before Piccadilly, further, you know, it's the other direction. Castlegate is actually critical, really, in terms of, you know, and as you said, the connections even to the river, down as well. But it was such an important street in the history of York. And it's because we see it today as just a tiny little street. In actual fact, it was very, very important.
Yeah, I think I completely concur with your views on this. Yeah, I think Castlegate it doesn't look very significant, but if you look at the buildings on it, you know, if you look at Fairfax House and Castlegate House, it's clear that in previous centuries it was quite a posh place to be, and the fact that that Castlegate House was built for the recorder, who was the chief judge for the whole of Yorkshire, essentially, where the assizes were held. That chap called Johnson, and that was and that was very close to the castle. So it's you know, it's the courts, the castle. It's a real centre of power and influence. Yeah, and we tend to just think of it as it's got a nice chocolate coffee shop on it. Tucked away.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Didn't question small additional information. I was working on the day for most of the time, and one bit, the photo I showed of people, of the builders lowering the coffin, we didn't see that photo until after we had done them.
Yeah.
We just had the notice saying below this notice, and we've done everywhere below that notice. But in order to find out, we put details in the York Press and found those two builders who were doing it, got in touch with us and came and talked about what they found and where they found them and all sorts of things. Another thing, very quick, the last comment from here, another of my volunteer roles was cataloguing plans from the city architect and the city surveyor, including plans for Clifford Street, and there were loads of variations as to where it was going to go. But they included this area of land and who owned what in the 1870s. So that's very helpful. And where the alleys, the streets, and everything. So it keeps cropping up. Everywhere.
Fascinating.
It's
Because it was the 1829 plan that envisioned a new street going straight from the side of St Michael's Friargate towards the entrance to what was then being built as the prison, opposite Peckett Street, and literally a straight line from the church straight across with proposed new streets. But it does have the old lanes still on it, and the Friends Meeting House and things like this. It's in such in the newspaper of 1829, it's very good reproduction for the age. And of course, it has been scanned and saved several times. But yes, I mean, there were moves to propose a covered market there, weren't they, with the road above it? So things that never came to fruition. We tend to take what our lives give us. So, you know, we explain how big Clifford Street is now compared to Castlegate. Well, that's just the way it's evolved, hasn't it? It's so hard to turn the clock back. I'm a buildings man, not a technology man. So for the people on Zoom, can I apologise that you've had a small picture all night? I didn't know how to set the screen up. I do apologise, those on Zoom. Those of us here tonight, I'll just give Andrew a final thanks.